Hello and welcome to Inside Exercise. I'm Emeritus Professor Glenn McConnell from Victoria University in Australia. The idea behind Inside Exercise is to bring to you the absolute who's who of exercise research. So exercise physiology, exercise metabolism, and exercise and health. And what I'm really wanting is for you to get your exercise information from the research experts rather than from influencers. And indeed, today I bring to you Dr. David Martin, who's currently Chief Scientist and Director of Performance at Aperon Life in San Francisco. And he's also currently an honorary professor at the Australian Catholic University. David has a really remarkable and varied background. So he started off in science, doing his PhD, looking at fatigue with exercise, etc., at the University of Wyoming. And then he spent many, many years at the Australian Institute of Sport before becoming the National Sports Science Coordinator for Cycling Australia. In addition to cycling, he worked in other sports and was involved with many Olympic medalists. And then, in a big change, he moved on to become Director of Performance Research and Development at the Philadelphia 76ers. He was there for 4 years before, as I said, becoming Chief Scientist, Director of Performance at Aperon Life in San Francisco in Silicon Valley. So there he works with high net worth individuals to work on their health span. We had a really interesting chat about all sorts of things, including working with Olympic athletes, working with the Philadelphia 76ers, the importance of belief systems in sports outcomes, and all sorts of things. I really enjoyed it. I think you will too. So stick around. Now, if you'd like to do me a favor and also help get the message out, please like, subscribe, leave comments, etc., because then the algorithms will be more likely to suggest Inside Exercise when people do searches. As always, it's much better if you watch the whole podcast, but if you'd like to jump around a little bit, you can look down in the notes and you'll see timestamps. You can click on those if you're on YouTube, and it will take you to those times. On the other platforms, you can just look at the time and then move to that point. Okay, so enjoy the chat with Dr. David Martin. Hi, David. Welcome to Inside Exercise. How are you doing?
I'm good, Glenn. You've tracked me down, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you.
Oh my gosh, man. It's Sunday. You're the only one that's like, oh no, I'm available Sunday night, 7 p.m. That's great. I've got nothing else to do. And I'm like, most people
Yeah.
watch a movie on Sunday night.
I would sit down and listen to your podcast on Sunday night.
Oh,
No.
thank you
So
very
how good
much.
is this? How
That's
good is
funny. That's
this? Yeah.
classic. I see you've got the psychology working already. So we're going to see that, people think he's a physiologist, but we'll get into it. You're a lot more than that. But, there's a lot of psychology as well. So, you're working the psychology on me. So, belief systems and all the sorts of things we'll get into. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's great having you on. So I can't help saying the last time I saw you, I can't even remember what it was. We were at a sporting event or something. And you were checking because you were in Australia and the 76ers were
Yeah.
playing. And you're like, oh, they were
That's
playing.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah. I mean, it was a really interesting, sequence of events where I was at the US Olympic Training Center. I was there after my master's degree, and I started to spend a lot of time with cyclists. And funny, at that time, we were testing Lance as a junior, and I didn't
mm,
know how helpful that would be because I did my doctoral studies through University of Wyoming, and I got to do some of my doctoral study research projects with, kind of B team Olympic athletes. And then I came over to the Australian Institute of Sport, and it was in the lead up to the 96 Olympics. And I had met Cadel Evans. And so
mm.
it was interesting when I was testing Cadel as a junior, like an 18, 19-year-old, I had data in my head of Lance Armstrong. And Lance was doing incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the first data that I saw on Cadel. I was going, holy crap, your numbers are better. You have a higher VO2 max,
Better
you have
than
a
Lance's.
better than
Mm.
watts per kg, better anaerobic threshold, better VO2 max, better economy. I actually wrote up an abstract and presented it at ACSM. I asked Cadell whether I could do it, and he said, are my data really better than Lance's? I'm like, you kill him. And he goes,
Wow.
yeah, go publish it. He goes, tell people. That's
Do
great.
it.
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love it. But
And that's interesting because he was also a mountain biker originally, right? He
he
won the world
was, he
championships in
was,
mountain bike. So in case
yeah,
people don't know, Cadel Evans, Australian, won the
he,
Tour de France. Yes.
Yep. That was the big thing. World champion, which is amazing. He never got the world champion position. He was ranked number one with
Oh.
the UCI in mountain biking, but he never won an Olympic medal and he never won a
Mm.
world championship. And one time I was asked to do a talk about what made Cadel great. And I tried to really land on the concept that he was just always almost there and how hungry that makes you. And I think that works in
Mm.
academia. I think it works in finance. I think it works in sport where you just didn't get the Nobel Prize. You just didn't get that position.
Oh,
You just didn't, that you're just constantly missing out on things that you love. But just to close that loop on the path,
mm,
I was at the AIS, for 21 years and met you with,
mm,
that's where I got to meet, Mark Fabrio and Hargraves and John
yeah.
Hawley and all the crew that, all the stuff, your colleagues and the things that you were doing at that time. And then an opportunity came up when my kids, you can tell from my accent, I'm born and raised USA.
Mm,
My kids were born and raised in Australia, and we always thought it'd be great to get them back to the US at some stage. And an opportunity came up to go work for the Philadelphia 76ers as a director of performance, big money, big stars, and I thought just 2 years, I'll take my long service leave, which is a wonderful part of Australian employment, isn't it? That long service leave money.
yeah, yeah.
I'd been there for 20 years, so I had 2 years long service leave. So I could get kind of half pay and go to the US and get a job.
Oh,
And
mhm.
then the idea was I'd have my job, I'd come right back to the AIS. But we can talk about
Right.
this later. Things changed at the AIS. So I stayed for another couple of years. My kids got through high school. And then I had this, unique opportunity to come out into Silicon Valley and do this other venture that we can get into later. So the
Yeah.
whole journey's been an interesting one of meeting elite athletes at the Olympic Training Center, doing my doctoral studies, really, super interested in endocrine responses and fatigue and heart rate variability and all these things that are common now. But, in the late 80s, it was super exciting, heart rate variability and cortisol, testosterone and salivary measures. And
Mhm.
when did you get so tired that you can't bounce back, and kind of fatigue that is persistent and non-adaptive versus fatigue that's
Oh,
just,
yeah, yeah.
the
Overreaching versus
good, yeah,
overtraining.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. All those topics were sky high and fun. So that's been the journey. That's been the whole
It's
cycle.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. So I want to flesh out all these things. But I was just thinking, so you were at the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport, in the 80s. Were you there in 1988 with the Seoul Olympics?
Yeah. So no, I came over. So 96 was Atlanta. It was the
Oh, you were
Atlanta Olympics
earlier
in
than
the
that,
US. I came over in 94.
later than
And
that.
part of my job was to work with Heiko Salzwedel. This was the Charlie Walsh, Heiko Salzwedel
Cycling.
era.
Mm.
Yeah. Back in the Kathy Watt days. Remember Kathy?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, who can
So
forget that?
So
Hmm.
my job was to help organize some of the altitude training camps because I was from the US, so I knew all the places in Colorado, and to try to help the Australian cyclists prepare for the heat
Yes,
in Atlanta.
Atlanta.
And we were trying to play around with thermoregulation themes. That's when the first cooling jackets came out. That's when I did
Okay.
my first project with Mark Fabrio. He actually
Oh,
attacked me when we first met. He was like, "You don't know anything about thermoregulation. You haven't published anything." He was like really getting
oh,
on me. And then we kind of flipped the
sounds about right.
script, and I said I could really use a collaborator. We've got some grant money, and we're working with all these pro cyclists. And Mark said he was great. He's super smart and super capable, and we got to collaborate on some projects where the Olympians were doing time trials in normal conditions and also in the expected conditions of Atlanta around 32 degrees Celsius. And we were trying to see if some people are more heat susceptible than others. And what we found is they're all heat susceptible. And it was a fun little project to meet Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't help thinking, how you said you did like a case study with Cadel Evans. You
Yes.
wouldn't you wouldn't know this yet, but we've got a paper that's in review at the moment where we've looked at Derek Clayton. So
Oh,
Derek
wow.
Clayton, if people
Nice.
don't know, is
Yes.
so
Yeah.
Derek Clayton ran the world marathon's fastest time in 1969, 2:8:33, when at that
Jeez.
time the fastest was 2:10. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
anyway, David Costor, who's been on the podcast, who's a legend, of course. I did my master's with him.
So I missed
I
that one.
know,
I'm
I know.
definitely going back for that one. Dave
Oh,
Costle,
mate,
that's
that was the
phenomenal.
longest. That was my longest. I don't want to turn people off, but 2 hours 12. I just love that guy.
Oh,
I just kept
he's
talking and talking.
amazing.
But
Oh, incredible.
he did a study. One N equals one, physiology of a world champion marathoner in 1969. That was Derek Clayton, and then we got him back in 1990 when David was getting all these masters athletes back, and VO2 max tested him in 1990. And then Andre Lagersh, who's a sports cardiologist here,
That's right. I
who I
know
had on as
Andre.
well,
Yep. Yep.
he tested him like just a year or two ago. So we've actually put a paper together
That's
on
so
physiology of
cool.
Derek Clayton, like three
Yeah.
over these three. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's I digress. So many things I'm thinking about because your thing. I actually looked at some stuff on YouTube of your stuff about belief, and it's just in my
Yeah.
head now because when you said about Cadel Evans, I was thinking, well, how much is his belief? And last time, how much is the belief? And the classic. Wonder if you could tell. It's a sad story, but wonder if you can tell the story about Amy Gillett and
Yeah.
how there's more to
Yeah.
performance than your VO2 max and your lactate
Yeah.
threshold and your economy and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a sad story. So Amy Safe married into the name Gillett. She was a rower and she transferred over to cycling and she had big engine, big O2 max for a female cyclist, great time trialist and wonderful personality, incredible domestique. She worked like really hard within the bunch. And
Mm.
unfortunately, there was a really terrible cycling accident before the Turrigan Tour, a German road race. And a woman was driving a car texting, so do not text and
Mm.
drive. She overcorrected and went head on into the Australian women's national team, and Amy was killed immediately. So there's an Amy Gillett, foundation, and they do so much great work to try to keep the roads safe, especially in Australia. But the topic of the story that you're alluding to, which was really a big change in the way I was looking
Yeah.
at physiology and performance was we had been testing all these national team women. And we knew, from Sarah Kerrigan, who was a gold medalist, and we knew from, Anna Wilson, who got a silver medal at the World Championships in the time trial. We had done all kinds of data collection with these power meters, and we'd done tons of laboratory testing. So we felt pretty confident that we understood the physiology required to get a medal at international competitions. We
Mm-hmm.
were not just looking at maximum capacities, but we're all looking at aspects of fatigue resistance, like how many high intensity repeat sprints can you do?
Okay.
We were looking at doing some really clever stuff where you could do a DEXA scan, look at how much muscle from the iliac crest, the hips down. And then we could say for this muscle, how much power does it produce?
Mm-hmm.
And then we could divide that by the total body weight. And we could say, is this power to weight ratio sufficient to get a medal at a big event, either flat or
Ah.
hilly? And then we
Mm.
could also then take the power to weight ratios and put them into the wind tunnel and look at coefficient of drag area. We'd done some really fun stuff with Monash University getting
So are
their,
you saying
their
power to weight of the actual muscle,
so we
not
were looking at how much power could be produced per kilogram
of
of
muscle?
muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's low, then the idea is you just need to recruit more of those muscle fibers. You have muscle mass, but it's not producing power.
Mm-hmm.
If you have good power per kilogram of muscle, and you don't have enough absolute power, then you just need to put on more muscle. But then we put all of that in the context of the body weight, because a lot of climbing is power produced
Yeah,
per
yeah.
kilogram of body mass.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're going fast on the flats, it's how much power you're producing per coefficient of drag area.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
the wind resistance
It's
becomes
very
a big
different.
deal. But the
Mm-hmm.
cool thing is you could build up a model, and very much like an engineer, you could just say, this person needs more muscle, this person needs more to be leaner, this person needs less drag area, and you can kind of see where's the rate limiter for making the bike go fast. And then when the bike went fast, then you could start to look at the tactics in a race, or maybe they have the power speed relationships are phenomenal, but they just don't know how to read a race. They're just not race smart or race savvy.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes you've got great power and great speed, but you fatigue very quickly. So
Mm-hmm.
we felt like we just, that's a very analytical, it's like you're working with a robot, isn't it? And you're just tuning the robot to say
Yeah,
more
yeah.
of this, less of this, more of this, less of this. But then back to the story, Amy dies. And so the whole national team's wiped out. So all these new girls get a slot in. But
So
now
just
we
to
have a
just to
very,
clarify, because
yes,
you said not only was Amy killed, but you
the
said the
whole
whole
team.
team And
It
only
was
one ever raced
terrible.
again? Is it or got?
Yeah, it was, I think one of them got back into racing. The large majority of them were in extensive rehab surgeries. It was pretty traumatic. And the poor coach, Warren McDonald, like you can imagine, this would be like a platoon sergeant watching his unit get blown up. It
Mm,
was horrific. So in response, the
mm,
national team got very conservative. If it's raining, don't ride in the rain. Be careful on descents. Let's do a lot of lab testing versus these harder, challenging camps where people get tired and sometimes fall off their bike. It
right.
was like we were going for the numbers, and we could get the numbers. The girls were starting to put, high VO2 max values, good power to weight ratios, good power for the muscle that they had, very aerodynamic, and it looked good on paper. And this was a time that we were actually publishing, the data on what was required to win at an international level. But there was like 3 years there, and the girls weren't really winning anything. And we
Hmm.
started to ask the question, how can we have athletes that have all the physiological prerequisites to win, but they're not winning?
Now, are you
And
saying, because I know you had, because in the YouTube you're talking about VO2 max and lactate threshold, and
yeah,
but also you were doing DEXA, but were you doing that, watts per kilogram of muscle and all that stuff, and all the numbers were good? So you're saying,
they looked really good. Some of the girls looked
okay,
phenomenal,
okay,
but they weren't performing phenomenal.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
And you said
And it
fit but
was
not fast. Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Mm,
Very
mm,
fit, but not fast. And so you can question the periodization and the prep and say, well, maybe they're going in a bit too fatigued. Maybe they're going in with lack of confidence, whatever. It wasn't happening. And so I had I actually had a neighbor who was a F-18 Super Hornet pilot, and we were talking, and I was saying like, how do you build up confidence in Air Force pilots? Because a lot of Air Force pilots die. It's very dangerous. Like they are flying super fast, low to the ground, and it doesn't always end well. And he was saying, look, you're trying to align competence with competencies, and you're constantly trying to
mm.
align how confident someone is with how competent they are. And we make our training very, very rigorous. But he goes, if you really want to learn about this, I'll hook you up with some guys I know at 2 Commando Regiment. You should go watch how they run their selection courses. And what they're
Okay.
doing is they're helping people that are very, very capable feel very, very confident in their capabilities. And they're
Mm,
hard. They're really, really hard. And they're not just selecting the best of the best. They're changing their belief systems, and they're changing, what they think they can do. So we brought some guys in from 2 Commando. They basically helped us out. We had a Lieutenant Colonel, Jerry Burson. He was phenomenal. And he would just say, what are the hardest parts of racing in Europe? And then he would say, let's create a camp. And all the
mm.
elements, from hearing foreign languages to late nights, to a car breaking down, to different types of food, to cobblestones, to all of it. Let's compress it, make it super safe, bring a lot of women in, and don't just look at their physiology, look at how they compete against one another to see who's the
Mhm.
best of the best. And then they will walk away with more confidence that I'm a winner. And that's what we
Yes.
did. And we started running these military camps, but they weren't just like crawl under barbed wire and lock arms and lay in the ocean and freeze to death. They were camps that were every part of the camp was designed with a specific challenge, with a specific outcome. We even, during the camp, not to take this too far, but one thing that we did was we deselected. We had like as when you get ready for the Olympic Games or national team, there's always a deselection. So there's women and men who are ready to go represent Australia, and you have to tell them, look them in the face, and say, you're not
No,
going.
you're not
And you have to
going.
explain why. And sometimes they take it to court of arbitration, and it's brutal. And
Mm,
so we had these girls come in one after another, and we said, this is just a game. It's only a camp. Doesn't really mean anything.
mhm.
It doesn't mean that you'll never make a national team, but you will not continue in this camp
In this
because of
camp.
your performance. And
Mhm.
we filmed the whole thing. And I mean, I was getting choked up. Girls are
Shit, man.
crying, coaches are feeling tense. Like, it was practice for everyone.
Mm,
It was so intense that
mhm.
they had let themselves down, or they weren't ready to advance to the next stage. And so the idea was to put all of this into very specific training. And then things started to change. It was really interesting. All of a sudden, Women like Rachel Neyland were starting to perform super well, at the Olympic Games. Gracie Elvin was unbelievable. She became like a real standout. She just rose to the ranks. She was just such a hard, solid competitor. And you could just feel the tempo starting to change. And the physiology wasn't noticeably changing, but the competitiveness and the confidence was extraordinary. That was fun.
I saw this the video you oh god, what was it? So what's the I've forgotten the name of the tracking. So you had you gave a talk, and the tracking people put online on YouTube.
They might
What's it
have,
called?
yeah. So there's a couple different groups that have followed that have done some videos of those camps. You can YouTube AIS selection camp,
Yeah,
or AIS, we call them challenge camps.
yeah,
And there's a couple of YouTube segments that have found their way
yeah.
forward. Some people hated them. People got really upset at us. They're like, "Why are you being so mean? Why are you being so hard?" And our comment back was that we're not going to have these women do anything in these camps that we wouldn't
they
expect them to
wouldn't
do
do
when they go to Europe.
exactly.
This is just the ultimate in
Yeah,
specificity of training.
and the thing. So in the talk thing I saw, you were quoting what some of them said, and they said it was the camaraderie,
Oh,
right? And
amazing.
it was
Yeah.
almost like you mentioned, military. It's like going into the trenches together, right? So
Yeah.
who you can trust, and also they built a belief in themselves, but also the other girls. And what I wanted to say was believed in them. Was that you mentioned in this talk I saw that you got them to actually say, who would you take to Europe after
Yeah.
the camp, and they selected the same people you
They
selected.
did. It
So then
was
they got
called,
yeah,
it's called, the SAS do it, Australian, the SAS are one of the military branches,
special air
special
services.
force, yeah,
Yeah,
special air
yeah.
services. So
Uh-huh.
they sit right in there with two commando as kind of like these elite fighting forces. And both of them use this technique. In Australia, they call it rate your mate. And it's done
Sounds
completely
about right.
confidential. I think you could do this in graduate school. I think you could do this. And it's basically, if you were going to do a project, who would you take in the lab to help you complete it on time and at the highest quality? Pick two. And so, but it's all done confidential. So he told the girls, identify the 6 women in this camp that you think would best represent Australia internationally overseas. And they would
Yeah.
pick the names, and it was clear as a bell. Yeah.
Wow. So then they end up knowing that they've got to believe in themselves, but the other girls, trust them
They
and whatever.
do.
So it
And all
just adds so much
the
more.
coaching staff believe in them as well.
So
Yeah.
anyway, this feeds into, because the talk I saw you give was about belief systems. Now, I don't know if you want to, because obviously we will talk
Yeah.
about the 76ers and all this other stuff and
Yeah.
what you're doing at the moment with your, but
Mm.
the work you're doing nowadays. But I just think this belief stuff is really interesting. So did you want to
Yeah.
explain, if you don't mind, because at first I thought, well, it's just placebo, right?
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
explained how it's a kind of a negative connotation with placebo or something.
Yeah.
So do you want to just take us
Yeah,
through
I
that a little
will.
bit? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because it's been a real eye-opener for me. So we had those camps going on. Many within Australia and hopefully internationally know the name Chris Gore. Chris is a fantastic researcher. He was the head of the Department of Physiology at the Australian Institute of Sport. He followed, first there was Dick Telford, then there was Alan Hahn, then there was Chris Gore. So lucky, lucky, lucky lab, just 3 amazing,
Yes.
human beings. Alan had struck up some great collaborations internationally, and there was one individual I knew and Chris knew as well, Olaf Schumacher, a medical doctor who'd done a lot of pioneering research with altitude, but also was doing some very clever stuff with EPO detection and biological passports. So we were able to work with him in a collaborative research project, and Laura Garvican, which was a doctoral student I was supervising at the time, she kind of helped led the charge. And the idea was to fund a camp. And again, we used female cyclists. We found them, they just give such good efforts. They're not funded very well. So when you get research money and you can fund an entire camp, then they will come and they will give amazing efforts. And they're, they record their diets and
Conscientious.
they
Yeah.
calibrate their SR, they follow instructions. Some of the guys are, the lads, they just,
It's
they're
funny
harder
actually.
to, yeah.
It's funny actually, because I was thinking you don't necessarily did that many biopsy studies, but when we did biopsy studies, it would
Yeah.
always be the woman wouldn't complain as much as the guys, but especially the well-trained guys, they'd be like, "Oh, don't do that."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
The women can be so good. So we basically organized a hemoglobin clamp study. And for those that don't understand what a clamp study is, it's essentially you take one kind of physiological variable, and what you do is you lock it, you control it so that it cannot move, and then you let in another group you let that physiological system behave naturally. So for us, to be specific, what would happen is the women would all come in for an altitude camp in Canberra. Now, Canberra is only 600 meters, so you'd think, how do you do an altitude camp there? But we had an altitude house. So shout out to, Alan Hahn and Chris Gore for putting this whole thing together. And they could live high up over 2,000 meters and train low. So it was a live high, train low camp. We knew that hemoglobin mass could change up to 6 to 10% over a 3-week block of live high, train low. And these camps had been done before. But we always knew that there was individual variability in how the hemoglobin responded. So what happened is the girls would all come in. We would use is carbon monoxide rebreathing technique, and you can measure grams of hemoglobin in the body, not a concentration, but actual grams. And then what would happen is through the first week, we would then pair match the individuals into high responders, ones where hemoglobin is really coming up quick, moderate responders, and low responders. So they're pair matched. And so you get 14 women, 7 pairs, all pair match. And what happens then is the one group, they would all give blood. But in one group, the blood that was taken out was proportional to the hemoglobin they were making. So you blocked the hemoglobin from elevating. So hemoglobin's an oxygen carrying, protein. And the idea was that if you blocked hemoglobin mass increases, you would block VO2 max increases through the camp, and you would block performance in like an all-out 5-minute time trial where we're measuring just power. So take all the technique out and oxygen uptake masker on and everything. And what we found, this was the belief effect thing, they all knew they were doing an altitude camp. They all knew that altitude usually worked. There were great success stories. And so in this group, both groups increased their 5-minute power output by about 3 to 4%. And you're like, what? Now, one group did it without increasing their VO2 max.
VO2 max.
So the hemoglobin clamp blocked, and they did it with a more anaerobic capability. Now, fortunately for us, we did a second test, and it was a ride time till exhaustion. 10 minutes after the 5-minute effort, they recovered, and then they had to do a full ride till exhaustion at their baseline VO2 max. And in that, we saw that the non-clamp group, the natural altitude group, they responded very well. And the other group, they did not respond. They had no change in their performance. And so it really made me think that your mind can help your body for certain things, but then your body will eventually take over. Like if you have the hemoglobin mass, you'll use it. It's a more aerobic contribution, and you have more sustained efforts. And you can't will your way. You can't just placebo your way out of that. But for the first test, you could. You could just believe in it so much.
Can you clarify? So what was the one where they did just as well? That was a 4-minute or 3-minute?
Yeah, 5-minute. 5-minute all out.
They did just as well. So just to make sure, because
both groups
so
went
when you
up the
clamped
same.
it,
Yeah.
the VO2 max it went up with the ones that, when you do altitude, you get an increase in, just to make sure people on the page.
Yeah.
When you do altitude, you get a stimulus from the lower oxygen, etc., to get your kidney to produce erythropoietin, so EPO, which people have heard of, to produce more red blood cells, so your hemoglobin mass goes up, which is what you're measuring with the carbon monoxide rebreathing. And they were getting that. You were matching them. So you had the high responders, low responders, you were matching them. But then one group, you were taking out that hemoglobin, so they didn't get the increase, but they didn't know that. And they performed as well in the 5-minute test.
That's right.
Despite having no increase in VO2 max, because people should have a look at Jose Calbert's interview, where we talked about what do you need for a good VO2 max, etc.
Yes.
You need oxygen delivery, and the main thing is your red
Yes.
blood cells. But you haven't got increased red blood cells, so no increase in VO2 max, but they perform just as well in the 5-minute test. So there's
Mhm.
your belief system. Now, but
Yeah.
what was the one? That's what I missed. What was the one they didn't? But you said you can't overcome that.
So then it was 10 minutes recovery.
Uh-huh.
And realized that the group that had improved their 5-minute time trial without the aid of this extra hemoglobin mass,
Yes.
they probably dug really deep and used more
Yeah.
anaerobic energy sources to allow it to happen. That's the only
Okay.
explanation. And so then there is usually consequences to using
Oh, because
anaerobic
10 minutes
metabolism.
later. Okay.
Yeah, so it's 10 minutes later, and now they have to ride till exhaustion, time
I
trial
get it.
till exhaustion.
I get it.
And the group that had extra hemoglobin, they improved their baseline scores. The group that
The
we
group
blocked their
didn't.
hemoglobin, theirs did not change at all.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so in one performance task, they just dug deep, believed, did it.
Hmm.
But in the other task, they were feeling the physiological effects of not having the
Yeah,
added
exactly. So they
mass.
they had the
Yeah,
belief in the first one, but the
yeah,
physiology was such that they probably had higher
yeah,
lactates and all that, and it was
yeah,
harder. And
yeah.
then 10
That's right.
minutes later, they were still stuffed. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and for
Hmm.
me, it was like I was just amazed at how so many of the studies that were done in altitude, they wouldn't have followed up with a ride time till exhaustion. They'd have only done like a one-off test. And I was like,
Mm.
wow. I
You
think
wonder
Philo
what's. Mm.
Saunders and Chris Gore have published other data saying that, some of the effect that comes from altitude training could be a belief effect. Now, not this for the muscle physiologists out there, some of them are probably going, wait a minute, I've heard of, carnosine is a dipeptide. It's an intracellular buffer. I've seen data that suggests
Mhm.
that with altitude training, carnosine concentrations go up by 40 to 60%. True, all true. So we can't discount that there were some non-hemoglobin mass adaptations associated with this altitude exposure that help contribute to the 5-minute task. We can't say that it's all belief
Yeah,
effect
yeah,
because all we did was clamp hemoglobin.
exactly.
But it's still provocative. It's still really
Hey,
interesting.
you know what would have been interesting is because, as you said, 10 minutes later they didn't do as well because they were probably suffering
Yeah,
the negative effects. I wonder if you'd done it the next day. Because at first, when you said they didn't do as well, I was thinking it was a different day, but you were actually saying they probably weren't recovering. Wonder
right,
if you did it
right.
on a different day.
I
But
don't know, but I can tell you that this kind of like you're leading towards this, hypothesis that I think has some data to support, and that is this idea that you fly and then you die. So if you're with tour riders and someone's having a really good day in the mountains, if they're going to get a place, they're going to get time on GC, that you let them dig, dig, dig. But if it's not really going to give them any monetary gain or team classification gain or placing gain, you got to really watch it because if you dig too deep on one of the days in the Tour de France, you have to back it up. And it's quite
mm,
common that if you overextend yourself on one day, the
mhm.
following days you can suffer.
Hey, I wonder what. Okay, this is a bit nitty gritty, but for a while there, they were talking about altitude. It's not just the hemoglobin, but it's the erythropoietin itself might be having effects.
Yeah,
So I wonder
yeah,
when you're actually clamping it, like the body's trying to make more red blood cells, you're pulling them
it
out.
is.
Your
It's
erythropoietin is probably through the roof.
So I got a story for you that you'll enjoy. So in the early days, in the lead up to 2000, Alan Hahn had really mobilized an international army to look at whether you could detect erythropoietin use or not. Erythropoietin, it's in and out of the body really quick, so they can inject it and within like 4 or 5 days, can't even detect it. So urine tests might have been useful, and the French had come up with a urine test, and they were looking at the glycosylation on the erythropoietin, and they could do some gel electrophoresis and say, hey, this is from a hamster ovary. This is not from a human being. It's a different
Mhm.
type of EPO. So it's
Okay.
exogenous sources. But that would only work if somebody had injected EPO and said, I want a urine sample within a day or two.
Okay.
So in Alan and all his wisdom, he had looked through the data from our altitude camps, and he had seen that yes, erythropoietin goes up, and reticulocytes, brand new baby red blood cells, they go up, and hemoglobin goes up, and sometimes ferritin, stores of iron, will go down. and there was a soluble transferrin receptor, and it would go up. And the ratios of how all of these different markers, or they're all tied in with erythropoiesis, this system of making red blood cells. All of these changes are in concert, they're all tethered together, and they all move together. But when you inject EPO exogenously, things uncouple. So if you're injecting EPO,
Okay.
one thing
Yeah.
that happens is, the reticulocytes go through the roof. So you're just stimulating tons
New
of
blood.
reticulocytes. Yeah. And iron can drop very quickly because iron's part of this
Being
whole
used.
erythropoietic cascade. And so what you could start to see is you could see uncoupling, that the system, the ratios of soluble transferrin receptor, reticulocytes, hemoglobin, hematocrit, they would change. And so statistically, a group got together using a lot of the altitude data and using a lot of the published data on patients that were given erythropoietin, because remember, it's a lifesaver for cancer patients and people that don't have red blood cells. That the relationship between administering EPO and going to altitude were different, and different enough that an on model and an off model could be created. So to validate this is to get to the point.
Yeah.
A lot of our graduate students got into a study. ADFA, it was all very, very carefully controlled, because you can't be injecting EPO into athletes, that send alarm bells off internationally, especially at the AIS. But the idea was, could these tests accurately detect who'd injected EPO and who hadn't? So there's a study, and a whole group of our grad students, doctoral students, they ended up getting EPO injected into them. They didn't know if it was EPO or not EPO. But me and some of my colleagues, we go out and play Tuesday afternoon soccer. And within the first week, there were two guys that were just like running like crazy. And we were all going, what the hell? And they were bragging. They're like, I don't know if I'm on EPO, but it feels pretty good. And we wondered, what the hell is going on? How can they feel so good after just really like 3 injections of EPO? That's way too soon for hemoglobin mass to go up. And that's when I read, like you're alluding to, EPO is a super cytokine. There's receptors in the brain, in all kinds of organs throughout the body. And this is an amazing, amazing cytokine. And so I think you are right that maybe there were some things going on in this woman's study that we talked about, where it wasn't just they just believed, but there's also, they might have had newfound concentrations of erythropoietin that might have been helping them in other ways. Who knows? But really interesting.
Ah, wow. Okay. So I want to talk a bit more about this belief. I realize there's so much stuff we want to talk about, but just
I'll keep the answer shorter.
No, that's all good. From the talk, you were saying about the caffeine experiment and things like that. I think we all know that placebo is really important. That you've got to. So if you're doing a study and you see, does this drug reduce blood pressure? You can't just go, oh, here's a drug. You've got to do, here's a drug, placebo. They don't know which one's which. And then, it's a different, and the placebo will actually have effects. So this is the thing, like, do you want to just talk a bit about how placebo does have effects, and then how you might harness that, and how it gets tricky? Because you mentioned how Shona Halson and you, and she's been on the podcast as well, was saying at one stage, why don't we just lie to them? Why don't we just tell them this is going to work and whatever, and how that kind of got a bit tricky.
Yeah, so let's start with there's a series of studies that have shown that two outcomes that are heavily influenced by your belief, and this is what people would call classic placebo studies. And two outcomes that are heavily influenced are pain and depression. Depression's hopelessness, and pain is discomfort, either systemic or local. And both pain and depression are heavily influenced by any modality that you believe in. Can take the fatigue away, take the pain away, take the depression away. It's funny because I always say the Tour de France is about pain and depression. It's all about funny. You're just trying to make your competitor hopeless.
I was thinking about how in the old days, well, this is a different bit. Remember in the old days, they used to have a drink of brandy down the bottom of the mountain. And I wonder if it's because they just believed it was going to take away the pain or something.
It might have been that, and they might have been deadening some receptors somewhere.
Exactly.
But so if you go back to the literature, there's studies that will show that if you have some pain, and there's different ways to induce pain, there's different models that can irritate the skin, with
Hmm.
some type of a compound that makes it like a rash or like a heat sensation. You can zap with electricity, you can induce pain. There's a couple studies that have used, they put saline in the temporal mandibular joint and then you generate jaw pain.
Hmm.
And so then they can do all these different funky treatments. So a small pill is not as effective as a
Yeah.
big pill. So a bigger pill will take the pain away better than a smaller pill.
Wow.
A
Hmm.
capsule almost always beats a pill. Usually red is
Red.
much more effective as a more aggressive colored capsule than a plain
So you think it would
capsule.
work better? Yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
you think
Like
that
a
it'd
red
work a little
Ferrari,
bit
yeah.
better. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Multiple pills are better than one pill. So that's another series of studies that's really
Wow.
interesting. An injection almost always beats an oral pill. So you can imagine why sports medicine docs are loving injecting
Inject
stuff. Like injections almost always win.
cortisol.
Surgery almost always beats an injection. So even sham surgeries for back pain or
Shame.
knee pain is better than even when they're not
Wow.
doing anything, they're just cutting the skin and sewing it up. They tend
Wow.
to be more powerful. And then there's all of this really interesting work that's being done now about like a physician, the look of the physician. So I'm doing a placebo on you, or not a belief effect on you. So you see, I put all my degrees
I
up
actually
behind
thought
my,
that
yeah.
before because in your talk, you said make
Yeah.
sure you've got, it's funny. My
Yes.
wife and
Yeah.
I, we have all ours in the cupboard.
Yeah, you
We're just
gotta
like,
pull them
I'm not going to
out,
put that up,
Glenn.
I
No,
should
you
put it
gotta pull
behind
them
me.
out. So
Oh
we
my
know each other,
gosh.
but if people don't know me, they're gonna be like, "Oh, look, it looks like he went to
Wow.
school. Maybe he knows
Actually,
what he's talking
I
about."
just, I know we're off on a tangent here, but this is what would happen if we were just chatting. Tell
Yeah.
him the thing about I went to Harvard.
With what, for me or
You
for
said,
the,
how some people, they say, I went to
oh,
Harvard.
God, we get this all the time. And so, in the US, there's these Ivy League schools. So you got Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Princeton. But what's happening is these universities, they're starting to do all these kind of online courses. And so we've had a couple people, because you're interviewing people that are going to work with you, and they'll have it on their LinkedIn profile. They went to Harvard. But if you dig down a little bit more, you start to be like,
I
you
went to a
you
workshop.
basically, yeah, you took a tour of Harvard. You bought a shirt at Harvard, or you did an online course at Harvard. You didn't get accepted and get
Oh
a
my
degree from
goodness,
Harvard.
just
So
terrible.
it is
Mm.
terrible, but people are using it to amplify their message. So if you hear a podcast and they can say like, this is a professor from Stanford, or this is a guy who did a medical residency at Johns Hopkins, then it helps you start to um, not think about the message as much, but think about who they are and be a bit more
And
accepting
that
of the
authority
message.
has had more
That's
likely to
it.
have a belief, a placebo
In
type
in
thing as
and
well.
in conferences you've been to and I've been to where there are workshops and everybody's a hitter, say it was Bink Saltine walked in the room. Nobody was like, let me introduce you to Bink Saltine. Done some
Mm.
stellar work at Karolinska Institute, published papers and what they just go, here's Bink. He's going to talk to you about,
Yeah. And you're
they
more
they
likely to
just
believe the data and things as well,
well, you
probably.
all know, you read his textbook, you read his papers, you know
Hmm.
who he is. And so you can't wait to hear him speak. But for a lot of like influencers, especially in the US, they got to amp it up. And then another thing that
Mm.
happens in the US, now I'm on this little tangent here with you, but it's still about belief effects, is there's all these certifications you can get in the US about, tons of certifications on certification for being strength coach and certification for blood flow occlusion and certification for whole body vibration plates and posture. And there's
Really?
tons of certifications.
Oh
And
my
so you'll
gosh.
meet somebody and they've got more letters
That
behind their
is
name than you can imagine. They essentially went through high school and they got interested in strength and fitness and took a bunch of classes. And you're like, wow, look at you.
all right. Hey,
They're
I
just
need to
like,
do a certification of inside exercise. You've watched the podcast and
yeah,
you're now an inside
you could,
exercise certified.
you could. That would be, people would probably pay for it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
the
think they should
last
though, actually.
thing I was
Mm.
going to leave you with the belief effect is and this is, you raised the point of Shona and I. talking. So Shona came on board at the Institute of Sport. For those that don't know her, she's done some amazing work in trying to understand how different active recovery modalities help elite athletes. She's also done a lot of work on sleep and how athletes sleep and what's good sleep and bad sleep and how to change sleep for the better. So Sean and I had talked a lot about how do you appropriately control studies that are looking at active recovery, because if they just believe in it, then they might get an effect. And how would we know the difference? And so we wrote up an editorial in IJSPP, and we called it Lying to Win. Instead of Dying to Win, we just flipped it to Lying to Win. And we tried to pose the question, if believing in stuff is so important for elite sport, and if athletes have pain and discomfort, and athletes have hopelessness and depression, and athletes suffer from fatigue, and all of those can be influenced by belief effects, then why don't we just look the part? Let's just dress up, get the right haircuts, wear the right outfits, get the right titles, put beautiful stuff behind us that makes us believable, and let's go to acting school. Why would we go take a short course with Glenn and Mark Hargraves on how glucose metabolism works? Maybe we should just learn how to act and be convincing and compelling. That would be more influential. But we didn't want to give up on science because we're all science trained. And we were saying that it is the scientist has to understand why things work. And if part of the effect is a belief effect and it's biochemistry in the brain, real neurophysiology happening, then it's okay to do things to let athletes believe in it because it does have an effect. But it's important to understand that when you put a crystal on somebody's wrist to try to help their balance, there's no crystal effect directly influencing balance. It's the belief that the crystal's working that might help your balance. And if you don't understand that and you don't come at it with that approach, then it's just fraud. You're just a liar, aren't you? You have no idea how this stuff works, and you're a bullshit artist versus a scientist.
Exactly. Now, this is what's interesting. So we're sort of vaguely getting at it all over the place, but the topic of this is learnings from working with the Olympians and the NBA. So I'm wondering, I keep wondering, how much did you do this with the athletes? How much were you, obviously you want them to believe in themselves, but how much were you going with the placebo? But then you go, well, there isn't really scientific, just that battle, and because again, in your talk, I said your ideal thing is when they believe in it and the scientific evidence for it.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
But what do you do though when it's the other? So there's 4 combinations, right? They don't believe in it. There's no science. So great, don't worry about that one. But if they believe in it and there's no science, they don't believe in it and there is science, and and how you gently push them. Because before we came on, I said how I learned from that, because my daughter came up and said, this influencer, who I won't say, said, oh, I need to have magnesium for my sleep. And I went and looked into it, and I was like, well, they didn't actually even say that, even though in the show notes it said, go and have all this magnesium. The person they interviewed actually said only if you've got a deficiency, and maybe some studies in older people, but there isn't really evidence for magnesium in sleep. So, but instead of doing the gentle way of my daughter, I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy's there's a charlatan and it's crap and it's whatever. And she wasn't impressed with my way of doing it. So as I said before we came on, your way of doing it is much better. So I wonder if we can talk about that. But again, sorry, often when I ask you a question, there's about 5 bits to it.
No, I love it. It's so much fun. We got to go have a beer together. And again, it's great.
All right.
So the idea then is you're in elite sports, so you're with an Olympian, and he says, I really, really believe that, I need to use this bracelet. It's got a crystal on it. It helps me sleep better. And you're going, that is the biggest load of crap. There is no possible way that some crystal you put on your wrist is going to help you. Doesn't work, or like you said, there might be some fringe supplement, and you're like going, you got to be kidding me. There's no evidence. We could even call up, Professor Louise Burke, and she's studied it to death, and she'll be like, there's zip, nothing. So then, but you're with an Olympian, and they're bought in. They love this. They say it works. And so if they do believe in it, you talked about this 2x2 grid
Mm.
where their belief is lower, their belief is high, and then the evidence that it works is lower, the evidence is high. So you're
Mm.
in this really interesting cell where their belief is high, but the evidence that it works is extremely low.
Mhm.
So I started like you going, listen to me. I've been in school half my life.
Oh,
Like,
crap.
dude, like say it
Yeah.
was Cadel. I was doing this before you were born. So your whole life, I've been preparing for this moment to help guide you with wisdom and insight based on where the scientific literature leads us.
Right.
I would have said that. And I would have got myself into a world of problem because he would have recoiled away from me and said, I'm doing something. I believe in it. It works for me. And now you're shattering my belief system and you're getting angry with me and you're treating me like I'm an idiot and you're super smart. So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna prove to you you're the dummy. I'm the one, and I'll prove you wrong. So I slowly over time changed for the two cells in that grid, which are the anomalies, where
Mhm.
the athlete believes there's no evidence, or there's tons of evidence, but the athlete doesn't believe. And what I
Yeah.
do is I go in a lot more cautious now, and I've talked about this. These are the same techniques that charlatans use and bullshit artists use, but it's trying to use them for good. And that's the idea of saying, hey, if you believe, like your daughter, in magnesium, you've heard someone and they've compelled you and you believe in it, try it out. Let's see how it goes, you know? I'm going to search for some literature to see if there's anything I can find. I'm going to talk to some experts as well and see if I can find. So far, I haven't turned up anything, but that's not saying it's not doesn't work for you. You go, girl, you do
Mm.
your thing, and let's see how it all works out. And then if they have a stumble, if they wake up one morning, they're like, oh my God, I had the worst night's sleep, you know. And then you say, did you try the magnesium before? And they go, yeah, I
Yeah,
did. I
right.
wonder if I should use more. You're like, oh, you could use more, or I don't know. Maybe it's not working. I've heard of some other people that tried it as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
especially if it's a
Softly,
friend
softly.
or a big influence.
Mm.
Taylor Swift, I just heard her say magnesium doesn't work for her at all. You know, and
Ah,
then, so
something like
you,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so you try
Okay. Okay.
to capture the moments that are deviating from where their belief is shaken and they're like, I did believe
Yeah.
in it, but now I'm not sure I believe in it.
Wow.
And then the other one is when the evidence is super strong. We did this a lot for altitude training. They say altitude training doesn't work. And you go, well, look, it might not work for you. And if you don't believe in it, I totally get it. And then you start saying, like, Mick Rogers gets a medal at the World Championships, and you just remind them that, God, it's amazing how well he comes on to altitude. And they go, he did altitude? Yeah, he was up in Stelvio with us for the full 3. I know, look, it doesn't always work for everyone. And
Yeah,
then
exactly.
they when their careers struggle, they're like, hey, can
I
I get
wonder if
in
we
on
could
one of those
try that.
altitude camps? Yeah. So you
Yeah,
just have
right.
to encourage them
Oh,
slowly.
I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
work on that because it's
Okay.
because when you said with the magnesium, like, oh, try it. And I'm like, oh, you can't try it. But like because you said try it. It's like
Well,
someone's
unless
making money out of this crap.
the part
Yeah.
that's a little bit tricky is if there's danger, like you know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
this is dangerous. This could be a tainted supplement and you could test positive. That's a big problem. Or, this is going to create an allergic reaction, or this is, if there's something noticeably wrong with it, I think you have to be a little bit more forceful. Like, I do have to raise a bit of
Yeah, exactly.
concern. Still
Hmm.
your call, but I just want to make sure that we understand the risk and we understand the benefits. And you got
Rather
to
than
be
just the
pretty
danger
clear with
to a
what the
hip
risks
pocket.
are. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to say because when you talk about placebo working, we've been talking about belief systems, right? But you actually get, because of that belief systems, you actually get physiological
Oh,
responses, right? So, you
yeah.
said you get
Yeah.
opioid,
Yeah.
did you want to just mention a
Yeah.
few of
Yeah.
those?
Yeah.
Because one of the papers you mentioned earlier, what was the one? It was actually a Nature paper,
Subiata.
right?
It is. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, that was a big one for me. I mean, I love my Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine and Nature.
mm,
They just sometimes you read papers in there, don't you? And I'm not taking a slam at their editorial board, but I'm like, how did
I
this get
agree.
into
I
Nature?
agree.
I haven't submitted often to Nature. The clamp study I told you about, we actually worked that up as a Nature submission.
Oh,
And you have to do the abstract before you go in.
yeah.
And I've never received a rejection so fast in my
Oh,
life.
it's so funny. I've got
It was
exactly the
like,
same.
yeah,
Yes.
send denied. It was like
The
so fast.
the
Yeah.
first time we showed AMPK getting activated in humans, they hadn't done it
Yes.
before. With Bruce Kemp as this big name in AMPK, he said, "Wait, let's go to Nature." I'm like, "Nature, really?" So he submitted it, and the good thing is the time
Yeah.
difference. It may have worked. I don't know. Yeah, because you're in
I
Australia, right? It works
that's right.
perfectly because you submit
It
it in the
does.
evening, you go to
Yes.
bed, They review it overnight and they reject it, and you wake up in the morning, you
Yeah.
haven't lost any time.
Yeah, it's so we
It's funny.
reject thousands of papers every week,
Exactly.
it's what they try to tell you. Um,
Exactly. So yeah,
but they,
tell us
yeah,
some
so
of
this
these.
nature paper,
Yeah.
I'll hit you with one that's probably the easiest one. This one is a really fun read. So we talked about pain before. You can inject saline into the jaw
Mhm.
joint. You can get pain. So what they did in this study is they did PET scans. So they're able to look within the brain in certain isolated regions at specific neurotransmitters, and your body is capable in producing these opioids. So you can do endogenous opioids. You can make them and they will bind to receptors and they will create a sense of pain alleviation. So
Mhm.
you can do this with anticipation. This is your own brain can do it. So what they did, which is a really cool study, is they introduced pain. And then what they did is they put an IV in the arm. So there's a needle in a vein and they can administer different drugs. And what they did is they said, we are about to give you morphine. And the morphine is going to help take the pain away. So on a visual
Mhm.
analog scale, while they're getting their brain scanned, they would say, how's the pain? And they'd be like, it hurts. So I'm like at an 8, 9, like my jaw is killing me. They go, okay,
Mhm.
we're going to now do a time course. We're going to inject morphine. And
Yep.
then every 10 minutes, let's see how the pain progresses. And you can feel, like anyone that's had an IV in, you can feel the fluid go into your arm. You can,
Yeah.
like, they go, here we go, ready for a push, morphine injection now, start the clocks. And if anyone's been in the hospital and been on morphine, hit that little button, it's like,
Yeah. Good.
oh, this
Mhm.
is nice. Yeah, it's like pretty
Mhm.
effective. And so what would happen is the pain then dissipates.
Yep.
So that's fine. That's fine. Then what they do is they do an infusion and they give the saline only, no morphine.
No
So they're like,
morphine.
here we go. You're going to get, this is the placebo. And what
Mhm.
happens with the placebo is they register with the PET scan, they register in regions of the brain associated with processing pain, these endogenous opioids increase. So the body is producing these essentially these neurotransmitters. And guess what? The pain goes away. So not as dramatic as morphine, but enough to really make the case that
And there
placebos
was
work for
no
pain.
morphine. Exactly. Exactly.
That doesn't get you into nature, does it? Like
No.
that's a cool study,
Mhm.
but that's
That's a
just a
cool.
placebo study with some really cool brain physiology. So then what they did, and this is all counterbalance, is they used a drug called naloxone.
Naloxone.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and you guys, those that under like you know, these for anyone who's associated with, addictions and drug addictions, what naloxone is really interesting because it sets up a competitive blockade. It binds to the receptor, but it doesn't generate those secondary signals within the
Mhm.
intracellular cascades. So it's essentially a blockade. It sits on the receptor, and you can take heroin or morphine.
Yes.
It's not going to give you much of effect at all. So it's
Yep.
a really interesting tool for treating addicts because it's like heroin's not going to work for you anymore, man. You
Exactly.
can
Mhm.
take it, but you're going to get no bliss point. You're going to get nothing.
Yep.
So
Yep.
then the question was, if the brain chemistry is part of the placebo, you say they pre-treat the person with the drip with naloxone, and then they give them the placebo. Now, without the naloxone, the pain went away, no worries. But now that the receptors are blocked, they say, here's your medication. What happens to pain? Pain actually goes up because you anticipate it going away, but it doesn't. And then you get anxious and
Oh my
nervous, and then that
gosh.
even makes the pain worse. And so it was a really classic study that said it's not just black box, like you were saying early on. And I thought as well, like this mumbo jumbo psychology, whatever, like just
Mhm.
believe, Ted Lasso stuff, believe and we'll win. It's actually brain chemistry is changing. And now there's a whole series of studies that are looking at all of the different neurotransmitters and how they respond and the responsiveness and whether you condition them. And that the belief is more than just a vague construct. There are actual mechanisms involved, and you can test them and study them just like any other physiological system.
So what about with performance related stuff? So if you believe something's going to make you bigger or stronger or something, do you actually get growth hormone released, testosterone released?
Um,
Like I wonder if
I
people have
would
looked at that.
there's Aaliyah Crum, who is the one who did the famous milkshake study. She was at Yale. She's a professor here at Stanford. And the milkshake study gets a lot of press where she looked at leptin and ghrelin, so these
Uh,
gastric hormones, and she basically came up with advertising in a shake. And the shake had the same caloric content, but one was called a Slim Shake, and it was supposed to be tasty but low calorie, and the other one was like the indulgent shake, and it was the
uh-huh.
same. They exactly the same shake, but they advertised them and prepped them differently, and then they checked the blood and looked at the responsiveness, and they were able to show that the gastric hormones change in response to the anticipation. And I believe
Wow.
there's another study that's out in diabetics that shows that the blood glucose response to ingested carbohydrates is different based on whether you believe that they're simple and high energy
Ah,
sugars
yeah. Hmm.
versus not. So to your point, I think there's a lot that can be manipulated. There's a lot of really fun physiology waiting to be discovered, based on how powerfully you believe in what's happening.
The other interesting one was because I was thinking about carbohydrate ingestion. I think it was Will Hopkins. He did a study, or Oscar
Oh, he
Jugendrup, or
did.
maybe both.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, where they said, okay, here's a placebo drink,
yeah,
and it was a placebo drink, and they did a time
yeah.
trial or something. And they said, here's a placebo drink, but it was a carbohydrate drink, right? So they
Yes.
could see how much was better just because of the carbohydrate itself. And then they said, and then they gave them a carbohydrate. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
then they
You're
gave them a carbohydrate drink, so they could
yeah.
see how much was a placebo and then how much was the actual carbohydrate.
Yeah. And the part that was super interesting, because it was like a 40K time trial. It was like a prolonged, I don't know if they did for 40K or 20K. Louise Burke was involved in that study.
Okay.
She was
Uh-huh.
over doing her postdoc, and meeting John Hawley, probably.
Oh,
And,
there you go.
yeah.
And
And
by
so
the way,
there's
they've
a,
both been on the podcast. A bit of a
I love it. I love
advertisement
it.
for people to
Well,
listen
they're
to. Yeah,
both amazing.
separately. Yeah. Mhm.
So what the take home message, I've used that study in a couple presentations because I've said that it's actually the data back up the concept that it's actually better to believe in bullshit than not to believe in something that works. So they were getting carbohydrate but not believing in carbohydrate, and those trials were worse than getting just water, sweetened water with no carbohydrate in it whatsoever for the caliber of athlete they had for the duration of time trial they had. And I was like, wow, I've got to start taking belief effects into account. So that
Okay.
means if you're working with an athlete, rarely is the case where you say, I don't care if you believe in this or not. Now, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you got to take care of whatever that meniscus or that joint. And you can be like, you can
Yeah.
believe in me or
Exactly.
not believe in me. I'm just going to knock you out and do my thing because I will make you better.
Yep.
But in the realm of high performance sport, you better have them on board. And just as a quick aside, I think, because we talked a little bit, I spent time with the Philadelphia 76ers, and these are super high profile athletes, and they are taken care of, by, you know, you would think high performance individuals, healthcare specialists like strength and conditioning coaches and physical therapists and massage therapists and exercise physiologists
Hmm.
and biomechanists and skill acquisition. So you'd think like they got all the money, more money than
Hmm.
God. Like they can do whatever they want. Um, but what you find, what gravitates into that profession, you probably see it in AFL as well, um, is that if you can convince people, if you have the personality that is convincing and influential, that will be more desirable than really smart, thoughtful,
Wow.
scientific, well-read individuals that actually know the answer to the problem.
It's
So you
kind of
get this
depressing, right?
content. It's depressing.
Because
It
it's like the
is. Tell
bullshit
me about
artists are
it.
going to do
Yeah,
better than the people that are
they
good, but
will.
maybe don't have the personality or something.
They will until the athletes start to find out that this is where Shona and I went with that editorial. It's
Mhm.
better if when you believe in science, I think it's a more stable belief system. And look, science is changing all the time and we have to shift our views. But when you believe in scientific evidence, a lot of times it has more carrying power and it's more sustained. And when you're a bullshit artist and you get some athletes to believe in you, one, a lot of your colleagues, a lot of us, this is where your podcast is so good, is you'll call it out. You'll be like, that's just bullshit. And so then if athletes start hearing it's bullshit, that wrecks their belief effect. So what you want is if you can get the science and the
And the
believability, the
belief.
salesmanship together. And I think, a lot of these influential, charismatic bullshit artists, they could probably listen to your podcast and take a course, and learn some stuff. But conversely, the people that are, in the scientific world, we've got to teach the applied sports scientists to be believable, just like we have to teach medical doctors to have good bedside manners and to be believable and to be empathetic and charismatic and, pay attention and show humanistic qualities that are desirable.
Yeah. So again, a couple of thoughts there. I was thinking, when I was thinking about notes before we talked, with the belief thing, it made sense because sometimes you'll hear that it doesn't matter the coaching style or the coach you've got or the training you're actually doing. Sometimes endurance athlete, for example, it's the belief. If you believe, because someone will say, well, hang on, that guy does mainly intervals, the other person does long, easy stuff, but they're both running the similar times. Because we mentioned before we came on, you saw Andy Coggin's podcast about zone 2, and I've also had Michael Joyner on, and whether like all roads lead to Rome or not, and Michael Joyner was saying all roads lead to Tokyo, because in the Tokyo 5K there was three different very different types of training, but they ended up similar finish. But anyway, it made me think that a lot of it, because I know with Arthur Lydiard, the classic training and things, they believed in him, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he wasn't a good coach. Obviously, he was magnificent. But if you believe in a coach and you've got that relationship, is that almost better than having a coach that's just got, all this experience and all this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that I've seen this a lot too. One of the first cases for me was Shane Kelly, who was a kilo rider, raced at the 96 Olympic Games, pulled his foot. It was a
Pulled his
famous
foot
event.
out.
Yeah. And so he was Charlie Walsh and Gary West. They'd worked with him as a kilo rider, and the volume he was doing was phenomenal as a cyclist, as a kilo rider, an event that,
So 1,000 meters, just in case people don't get it. Yeah.
1,000 meters. And, it was basically, he was riding like a road cyclist, and, he's thinner and he was, super fatigue resistant. And then later he ended up there was a change in coaching staff and philosophies changed, and he started to almost train like a sprinter. And yet his times in the kilo were within about half a second for his PB. And so although, believing in your coach is important, and performance, culminates and can be at a very high level coming from different strategies and different training philosophies. The one thing that each of those so Martin Barras was the coach for the high intensity, high power approach. And then he's got Gary West doing all this stuff with the volume approach. But both of those have to get the recipe right. So it's like if you're going to cook a stew and it's going to have a lot of meat in it, you're going to season it differently than if you're going to cook a stew and it has almost no meat and mostly vegetables. So they can both come out great. They can both be a wonderful stew, fresh baked bread. You're going to love it. But you're going to have to, the seasoning is going to be very different. The tapers are different. The way you distribute your time throughout the week is different. The number of times you can peak throughout a season is different. Your injury risk is different. Like there's a lot of stuff that's different with the different approaches. And so I think that you still have to be systematic, and you have to be very familiar with your approach. The best coaches kind of understand if they believe that volume is important, then they have to work out the intricacies and the nuances within it. So as a sports scientist, what we have to do a lot of times is figure out what is the overall belief system of the coach and of the program, and then how do they still need us desperately because they've got to get the tapers right, and they got to get the loading blocks right, and they got to figure out the durations of loading blocks. And if somebody gets sick, they need to know how to pull them back into the cycle. And so if they're at injury risk, they need to know how to modulate the approach. So there's still They need to know how to eat for the different ways. And it still requires a lot of support, even though they're two completely different approaches.
Yes, yes. Now I'm also conscious that we're sort of talking like I'm sort of interviewing you like all there is to you is the belief system side of things. When
Yeah,
obviously
yeah,
there's all the training load, there's all the other stuff. So did you
yeah,
want to talk a bit more, I guess, about
mm,
what you think, what learnings from
yeah,
um,
yeah.
Olympics, NBA,
I,
whatever.
I would say what one thing I've done in my career is you'll see a lot of papers on the physiological characteristics of the best athletes in the world, and you'll also see a number of papers on demands of competition. And so in my head, and I'm not the only one, you said you had Dave Costel. I was heavily influenced by a lot of Dave Costel's,
Mm,
work. The idea of really understanding what kind of athletes can win at the highest level and seeing if you're working with a team that has some of those athletes in it. When you can test them and tell them, like we did with Cadel, you have the physiology that is as good, if not better, than people that are performing exceptionally well internationally as a road cyclist. If you can figure out the rest of it, you probably have the physiology to be right there. I think that's a very powerful, and
mhm.
I think it's real. You can show them the numbers. You said you had Michael Joyner on. He'll show you how to run a sub 2 hour marathon. And when you can show someone, look how close you are, look how close you are. If we get this right, we get this right, you will be right there. I think that's very, very, very powerful. So the part of saying we understand what the best in the world are like, and then the other thing is saying let's really drill down and understand in a game of basketball what's required to win. How are they moving? How do you be fit enough so that fitness is no longer an issue? You can guard harder than anyone else. You can move quicker than anyone else. You can get into these open positions and then let your skills showcase themselves in the best way. Fitness is no longer part of the problem. You've covered that off, and now it just becomes a game of skill and tactics. I think that really helps. But as you go about both of those, the understanding, communication, belief, and buy-in, you also have to get, when I went to the Sixers, I had to try to convince very wealthy billionaire owners to believe in the approach that we are taking and to believe in the people that I want to hire and to believe in the way I want to buy equipment and set up a training facility to give the best possible chance of winning. And you have to sell to the coach, believe that our approaches are reasonable, believe that the advice we're giving back to you is consistent and reliable. And then we have to talk to the athletes that you're hurt, believe that we've got a good team around you, and believe that we're going to get you back in a safe way. And when everyone's kind of believing, then that's a really good deal. In pro sport, they all want a story. So they'll ESPN, they'll interview you and they'll be
Mhm.
like, so where are we at with the Sixers? And is this team ever going to win? And you got to have a story. And sometimes I think the scientific story is one of the best stories. How many times have you ever heard a coach and coach is like, well, we're just going to dig hard. We're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to work harder. We're
Mhm.
going to no stone unturned this year. We're going to go get them. This is the year. I feel
Yeah,
it. I got a great coaching staff. We're going to go get them. I listen. I'm like,
there's
what
no
you didn't tell
specifics
me
at
there's
all.
nothing. You told me
Yeah.
nothing about how you're going to try to win this year.
Mhm. Mhm.
Whereas when you hear a coach that's like, we're changing the game. We're moving the ball more than anyone else has seen. We're loading up on our three-point shooters and our point guards. We think that's going to be the future of the NBA. We've got some bright young prospects coming up, and we're going to rotate a lot of our players early in the season so that they're not overly tired in the middle, so we can position ourselves well for the final. Like, I want to hear something. Tell me a story. How are you
Mm.
going to win?
And
Um,
how did you, out of interest, how did you go? So you were, director, performance research and development at the Philadelphia 76ers. But prior to
yes.
that, you were national sports science coordinator, Cycling Australia. How did you go from there? I know you said you thought it was going to be 2 years and all that. And what was your selling point? The science? Was that?
Yeah, so it was an interesting job search. It lasted for a year. There's over 80 people involved in the job search. Sam
Mm.
Hinkie was the general manager who ran it. He's a Stanford graduate and very thoughtful, very strategic. he doesn't like picking apples. He likes growing an orchard. He's doesn't want to rush to be mediocre. He wants to patiently pursue excellence. Like I love listening to this guy. He was just
Okay.
such an
Mm.
interesting kind of
Because this was like a
strategy.
rebuilding, right? They were doing
It
crap, really
was,
crap.
the
Yeah.
team was terrible, and he
Mm.
took it upon himself to resurrect. There was new ownership, and they were going to change the Sixers into a contender team. Um, the part of that was that they were going to have to lose for a bit, and that helps you get draft picks that help you build up the
Uh,
chances to win at the highest level. So for me, it was a big, long search process. I got interviewed multiple times. I was interested in going back to the US because, as I said, my kids I have two boys born and raised in Australia. And my wife and I are both from the US. We thought it would be a great experience for them to go back
did
and
they did you
feel.
apply or did they contact you? I'm just wondering
They
how it
headhunted.
started.
It was a headhunter
Uh,
that
okay.
they say, would you be willing to go through this process and see if you'd be
And
a
is that because they
the
were
candidate?
looking for more of a science? They wanted a
It,
science.
yeah, it was a global search, and they were really interested. Cycling Australia had done really well. They talked to a
Mm.
lot of people, and we had built the combat center from scratch at the AIS.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
we'd also done this innovative skeleton project where we tried to get a medal out of Australian female skeleton athletes, which is a winter sport event in a very short period of time. And they'd read some papers that I'd written, they'd heard some lectures that I gave, and they just wanted to have
Great. Hmm.
a unique thinker as part of their decision-making team, which is a real, that's a real Silicon Valley type way to go. You don't want a bunch of clones, you want a bunch of different types of thinkers.
And just to clarify what your job was, because I saw you wrote, you designed and implemented the team that supports the team. So you were,
Yes.
mm,
Yeah. So I got to hire 8 staff. So I got to hire strength coaches, physical therapists. At the time, they didn't even have a physical therapist. I hired an Australian physical therapist. Shout out to Scott Epsley. He was amazing. And he, I'd heard of him in the lead up to 2000 Olympic Games. He was helping Nathan O'Neill, a very top level cyclist. So he had tons of experience, and we were able to bring in, from massage therapists to physical therapists to strength and conditioning staff. I got to, Shona Halson and Australian contacts. We got to talk to them about the design of a facility. And then we got to bring in a whole bunch of new technology. We were bringing in shot tracking, like RSPCT shot tracking, and connecting it with Connexon player tracking. And we were building up models for what we called game equivalent minutes. And we were trying to create a structure that was aggressive and, promoted the right kinds of adaptations for the game, but in a really safe way. And then we were trying to make sure we were ready. There's a lot of injuries in the NBA that if anybody fell, we would be able to bring them back as quick as possible. And then we tried to create a culture that was get them in and trusting us quickly. And if they move to another team, make sure that they leave saying, I learned so much from that group and I love that group and I'll always keep in touch with that group. So we're really trying to build the camaraderie and culture that went with it. So the timing was right. The budgets were great. And the front office was ambitious, and it was a super exciting time. And then
mm.
the rest of the NBA just watch and copy. It's great,
Oh, did they?
because yeah, you want to be. For my first 2 years, I was still employed at the AIS, so I could speak quite um, with an opinion. Um,
Mm.
After 2 years, I was full on with the Sixers, and then you got to look after your job a bit. So I probably wasn't as bold as I was in the first two
Mm.
years. Um, but yeah, so it was really fun. I've made some great contacts. It was a super good challenge. I got to meet a lot of super athletes. Like these players are huge athletic individuals. Just so amazing. Yeah, one of the players I got to work with, Joel Embiid, he became an
No.
MVP and his career started in a really dark place. And to just watch him go through that whole process was really fulfilling, really exciting.
And what's it like working with these people? So again, I think well, NBA, but also top Olympians and things like that.
Mm.
That they can be quite painful, I'm guessing, and they're very very
It-
perfectionist, very
yeah.
Why don't you tell me instead of me saying?
Well, I would say in the NBA in particular, trust is the biggest thing. There's, it's a lot of money, 30, 40, $50 million a year. That's a lot of money. And so their agents and them, they want to protect their position and have the longest career they can. And information can be dangerous. So what if you got information that said this player is not in good shape, or this player has a back injury and it's not going to end well. Their career is not going to be long at all.
Mm.
What if you find out information that, they're psychologically, they don't perform well under pressure? Like if you learn things about a player that can be used against them, that devalues them. So not a lot of players want you too close or to learn too much about them. It's a
Oh.
big game of trying to create the illusion of excellence. So what we would try to do is a great way to build trust is when a player is in need, you just jump in right away. If they need anything, you try to help them, and you try to help their families as well. You try to help their wives, their kids, their moms, their dads. Like if there's a way to help them, you try to say like, I told our crew we're a lot like Jedi warriors. Whoever is in charge, we just support. We are there to empower the leadership at the time. And if that leadership leaves, then we are there to support the next leaders. That's how we work. And we can't be sitting in the corners bitching about whether we like this move or this trade or that trade. You got to really almost be, it's almost like a nurse or a monk you just have to be you have to really be a giver. And you just have to like let your ego slip away, and you just
Mm.
have to work together as a unit. You have to troubleshoot problems, give options and opportunities. Don't dictate and mandate too much. Let the players make their decisions. Try to encourage them along the right way. Wear the blame when things go bad, if you can a bit. I'll wear that one, but give them the credit when things go well, and try to manage up really well. Try to make sure you're doing the kind of things that the guys running the teams are making huge money. They're making millions of dollars, these people. And so they do not want to look bad. So you have to work in ways that help exude confidence in the leadership of the team you're around. And remember, it's entertainment as much as sport. In the NBA, it's entertainment. In the Olympics, we can be a little bit harder about this is the day, this is the event. Let's practice, 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 practice. No stone unturned. And it's more of an athletic display. But in the NBA, like and in a lot of pro sports, it's entertainment. So you got to certain times players got to play because that's what sells tickets, and you just got to manage them accordingly.
So I get the feeling it was pretty exciting and stressful because when I did see you, I can picture you, but you were just I think I was sitting next to you and you were just like checking the
Yeah,
score every second. It was like I think it was a really important game or something, and so it must
yeah.
have been like amazing time, I guess.
Yeah, it
Mm.
was. It's really good. And I still stay involved in like a little bit of a consulting role. I still help out the team on certain projects, which is great. And then I also keep in touch with, Luis and John, and then all of the sprint group at ACU and adjunct faculty there. So, and they're doing a lot of really fun sports science related projects. And then I do a little bit with the Queensland Academy of Sport as well, and it reconnects me with Alan Hahn and Megan Shepherd, and they've got a great group up there as well. So I kind of get my sport, scratch that itch through those contacts.
So when it finishes, like so what happens, like you guys did better, yeah, at the
Yeah,
76ers.
they did.
And
Yeah,
then I know it can be, I don't actually know what the politics were and you don't have to talk about it, but I know sometimes if you start losing, everyone's gone, you know?
yeah, it is that way. So usually what happens is you sign a contract. I was on a 4-year contract. I
Oh,
actually
okay.
had, with full disclosure here, I had an idea, and I had pitched an idea to the owners, and it was they own a lot of different sports. So they own ice hockey, football, they own basketball, they own soccer over in Premier League with Crystal Palace. So they owned a lot. So I had this idea of like how you could create a new entity within this ownership group that has all these different sports. And I said, I don't want to do another 4 years like I did this 4 years. It's pretty demanding. You're traveling a lot, and it's really solid. I said, But what I would do is, if you like this idea, I would take this on board for you. And some people liked it, a couple owners liked it, a couple of people in the front office didn't like it as much. And that's where the politics come in, who should drive something like this and is the timing right? And I said, I'm firm enough on this proposal that if I get it, I'll stay. And if I don't, I had something else that I was looking at. And they said they didn't think the timing was right. So then what happens is you say, okay, thanks very much, shake hands with everybody, and then you head off to your next venture. So that's what I did. I headed
And that
off
was your
to,
4 years anyway, right? So that was
that was
your,
my 4 years. Yep. I
yeah, yeah,
finished
yeah.
my 4 years and then I decided if to do another 4 years like we had just done would start to be like working more in a factory. You can imagine the first 4 years you're building and building and building. It's really exciting. But then it's like creating a course curriculum for students and then looking at the next 3 years and going, I'm going to be teaching the same classes to the same kids in
It's
the
kind of
same,
incremental. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So but that's all right. So then I get to try this next venture. Yeah.
Hey, okay. So I want to we talk about your next venture, but I want to go to Twitter for a minute. And I was actually pleased to see because so on. I know you're not on Twitter. So on
Yeah.
Twitter, I send out saying I'm about to talk with
Okay.
and do you have any questions? And I was actually happy to see. I know I'm plugging my own podcast, but Abigail Mackey, who I've actually
Yes.
interviewed
She's
already on the
great.
podcast, she said,
Yeah.
"Say hello from me." Dave and the team at AIS Canberra when I was there in 1996 had a big influence on my decision later to go into research. Also, remember Dave's passion for science and having time to discuss. I didn't choose the elite athlete track, but the approach is the same. So,
That's great. Abigail. Yeah, she was great. And doing amazing things now. I've bumped into some of her work now and then and just doing some incredible stuff.
so guess what? It made me think because someone else sent me a message saying, ask Dave if he's ever, oh, very easy word I've just forgotten, um, regretted not going into
Oh,
academia. But I actually think you kind of were in academia in a way because you were sports science, you're going for
yeah.
grants, you're
Uh,
publishing papers.
We were, and I was adjunct through Edith Cowan University and University of Canberra, and and now with the relationship
Australian
with
Catholic.
ACU,
Mm-hmm.
Australian Catholic University, it keeps you connected to research themes. When I was doing my doctoral studies, I for 2 years was on a teaching assistantship that turned into a research assistantship. And for those 2 years, I taught a lot, and I enjoyed lecturing. I really did. I enjoyed the teaching. I don't always enjoy grading the papers. I remember some nights where you're
Yeah.
tired and you just have a
Mm-hmm.
stack, don't you? And you just got to grab a cup of coffee and you're like, okay, let's go. Let's be positive. And
Mm-hmm.
then you read two essays and you're like, these are terrible. Were you
I know.
not
That's when I
listening to,
started drinking
yeah.
beers, actually. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
was, yeah.
So that part I didn't miss, but I do miss student projects. I do miss student enthusiasm. We get a lot of Stanford students coming in and interning with us right
Okay.
now, and I really enjoy their perspective and their excitement. And I enjoy going to conferences and presenting papers and going with students and doing their
So
first
you have
poster or
been
their
pretty much
first
an
podium.
academic. But you've,
Yeah, but
yeah.
more from it'd be more like a research academic, being like in a role that's more research oriented than teaching oriented. So
Yeah,
from an
yeah.
academia perspective, I probably haven't done tons of the
The
teaching
teaching.
curriculum
Ah, okay.
development and student supervision. I've done more of the kind of doctoral supervision,
Mm-hmm.
honor
Exactly.
supervision, master supervision. Yeah.
Now, the same person says something which I thought was pretty funny, but I don't quite get it. But maybe you will. Maybe it's an American thing. He said, would you rather fight with a thousand 1 pound chickens or 1,000 pound chicken?
I would probably go at the 1,000 pound chicken. I love the
The big
big,
fish. Yeah.
hard. Yeah. I've always really enjoyed underperforming programs. And I love it when, others like this too. But when people are like, you can't do that. There's no way that's not going to work. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
also I've always, my mom was a mathematics major. My dad's an engineer. Um, I've always enjoyed being around clever, capable, curious people. And I love celebrating them. I love to I love being around Luis. I love being around John. I love being
Mm,
around conversations with you. So much fun. Like I love like Dave Costle, incredible.
mhm,
And so I've always thought it's really fun to like it's like if I want to build a house and I'm gonna it's my house, so it's my team. I'm gonna build the house, which is like a team trying to build performance. I love the ability to go into the hardware store and see all the different tools that are available and just
mhm,
look through, oh, there's the Fabrio, there's the Hargraves,
mhm.
there's Glenn, there's Luis, there's John. Oh my God, look what's going on over at Perth.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is crazy. Newton's doing this, or I love people that have dedicated their life and developed real mastery over a topic. And I love to see when would you bring each of those tools out and when would you try to implement them and use them and harness them and combine them for an outcome with an athlete. I've always found that
Which is what you've
super,
done, obviously,
super. Yeah, I love
and
it. I
thought
think it's
outside the box. And
really
mhm.
fun. Yeah, yeah. I think that's really fun. Um,
All right, I've got one here on Twitter from Nicholas. How do you balance strength and conditioning needs / goals with sports science metrics, competitions, and what coaches want from the athletes, especially if they do not all align?
Yeah, yeah. I think so it's a good question because I think we would always like athletes to be stronger and more resilient. And coaches always want to like look at game craft and strategy and technique, and they just want to have them out on that. They just want to one as a coach, you got to remember they got to look in control. And a great way to be in control is to have a practice where you are in control. In a game, it's embarrassing, especially if you're getting beat. But in practice, it's not embarrassing. You are the captain, and that's a chance for you to tell everybody, I'm in charge. So if you're the coach and the athletes are not out on the pitch following your lead, they're all in the gym with the strength and conditioning coach doing really relevant, appropriate
Hmm.
conditioning.
Hmm.
You're no longer the leader. The strength and conditioning coach is the
Yeah.
leader. And you don't
Hmm.
want to lose that leadership. So I always try to, with strength and conditioning coaches, remind them that it's almost better to do it kind of like sneaky training a little bit.
Ah.
Like we don't want to, and some strength and conditioning coaches love to showcase it, like to be out on the pitch and I'm in the lead and I'm the guy.
Mhm.
And especially in the US, there's strength coaches in the US making $1 million a year. These are strength
Holy
coaches. They're
mackerel.
not like a full professor at Oxford. This is a strength
Ah,
coach. And he is
yeah.
out on the field and he's blowing his whistle and they are like, up, down, let's go. And he's leading like
Mm.
a military general, the players on the field. Now you got to
Mm.
be really
Coach wouldn't like
careful
that.
that the
Hmm.
coach doesn't like that because it's the conditioning you're doing is probably highly valuable. And the more you can do to prevent injury, the better. But if you take away from the leadership role of the head coach or assistant coach, then there can be a lot of conflict. So I don't know. I like when strength conditioning is kind of done. I like individual sessions and I like trying to piece them together almost kind of quietly. But for a strength and conditioning coach to get promotions, he's got to really showcase, or she has got to showcase on Instagram and Twitter how amazing it looks and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that can strike up a conflict. And I think you just got to be careful there. So get in as much as you can, but don't take away from the leadership of the coach.
Fair enough. Here's another Twitter. Okay. Do team sports players need specific aerobic training besides the training obtained from playing the game? If so, how much do they do? I mean, it's obviously going to depend on the
Yeah,
sport
no,
and
no,
the position of the player.
it,
And
I'll tell you
mm,
that so my philosophies there, especially in the NBA, and I think it works from colleagues I have in the NFL as well and ice hockey as well, is remember that the game is there is an element of risk that is baked into the game.
mhm.
But when you're conditioning individuals, the element of risk is extremely low. So as you go from very low fitness to moderate to high levels of fitness, be them game specific, when you're doing it with conditioning, the risk of someone getting hurt is almost nothing, you know. When you try to do it through games, it's a lot more fun. I know a lot of players that do not like to do
Ah, I
conditioning at
see. I
all.
see.
They just want to play themselves, but the risk of getting hurt is extraordinarily high, especially the less fit you are. And games are
Mm.
unpredictable and they're half-ass crazy. So the same goes with like racing in the peloton. A lot of cyclists, they don't want to train and do intervals and get ready for the season. They're just going to ride, especially older cyclists.
But then they
They
could
just want to
crash.
ride their way in.
Mm,
But what happens is if the race isn't demanding enough, they're out there for 2 hours and they don't get a very good stimulus. And if the race is savage, they get
mm,
blown to bits. And
yeah.
as they get tired, they make poor decisions and they can lose confidence. And there's nothing worse than being in poor shape and performing poorly in the game. And there's no hiding it. Everyone's looking at you and they're like, oh my God, Glenn looks like, he doesn't look good this year. And that's not
Mm.
because you're not a good player, but it's because you're not fit yet. And so they're already, people might not give you the ball and you might not get opportunities and you might get benched. So I love preseason conditioning. And I love making those environments special and fun and exciting, and get the athlete hungry to get in the game, to
Yeah.
polish and
Mm.
refine his capabilities. And I love it when people are playing at a level that is well below their fitness capabilities, and it just makes
Ah,
everything so much
well,
safer.
this ties in with what you said earlier on in the chat, that it sounds like you were largely trying to get them the fittest team in the NBA, was it, before they
Yeah,
started
and at least
the season?
for each individual's capability and capacity. Yeah.
So
Um,
then they could kind of cruise, and that wasn't a limiting factor in the game and all that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And the
Mm.
game within the game for an NBA player is how much money can you make? It's not, you want to win an NBA championship, but for a lot of them, it's just how much money can you make? And so you want your career to be long. And if you're playing a desperate, you have no reserve, you have no acceleration reserve, you have no strength reserve, you're playing the game and it's asking everything you possibly have in the game. That's the hardest effort you do all week.
Yeah.
Then that's a ragged edge, and it's just prone for injury and overuse and knee problems and ankle problems and all kinds of problems.
So that's it's a bit sad actually, because you often think the best players would be playing because they love it and they want to win and all that. You don't think like Michael Jordan. You don't think, oh, he was playing because he just wanted to make as much money as he could before he got out. He wouldn't have
You
been as good, right? If you,
Well, you start. He could win games and he could win an NBA title, and he was a tremendously competitive. Michael Jordan, and so I
Mm.
think he just wanted to win. But if there's 450 players in the league, there might be, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 that have a chance of being on a team that could win. So a lot of them are managing their careers and managing their stats and try to figure out how to get a good agent and a good contract. Yeah. So winning is part of it. Once you get them on the floor, they want to win. They're competitive. I don't think anyone's just laying down, but
Mm.
at night between games, a lot of the thinking and a lot of the decision making is about how do I get my next contract? How do I get points on the floor? How
So I
do
guess,
I
okay.
extend my career?
I guess it's a very different, so because you've gone from the cyclists where I doubt any
Mm.
cyclist is going to do that well if all they're thinking is, oh, how can I make money? You know what I mean? That's not the,
Well,
I'm not saying that's all they were doing in the NBA, but
no, no,
I
no.
don't think it's, yeah. Mm.
Even professional cyclists are really worried about what races am I going to start? How am I
Getting a
going to
contract.
showcase my skill set, either as a
Mm-hmm.
domestique or as a sprinter or as they have to demonstrate that
Yeah,
they
if
can
you
help
win
the
one
team
stage, then
win.
yeah,
That's right.
exactly. Hmm.
So, and
It's not that different.
financial stuff is a really big deal once you become pro. I remember
Yeah,
one
that's
guy
true.
will probably remember this, Matt White. You may remember him when he
Hmm.
was a cyclist. He'd gone pro and he came in the lab once and we're going to do a VO2 max test. Or it's 30-minute time trial in the lab. We did those a lot. And I remember him saying, I'm a professional now. And I said, well, good on you. Congratulations. This is great. It'd be really fun to see how you're going. And he said, so what kind of effort do you want from me? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I can give you a free effort, you know, or I could give you like $1,000 effort or $5,000 effort or
Oh,
10,000. Like, what kind
wow.
of effort are you looking for? And he was just
Wow.
making the point that I don't turn myself inside out for free anymore, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, one more Twitter one, and then
Yeah.
I do want to get to your
Yes.
latest venture. Can you ask how? Oh, sorry. Anyway, can you ask how they tested lower body strength of players in the basketball, and how that related to the strength levels of sprint cyclists? I guess it's very different how you test
Oh,
it, but
yeah. So, well, you can look at vertical jump as an index of power, and a lot
mhm,
of the basketball
that's
players
true.
are extremely, springy. And I would say that some of the sprint track cyclists, their vertical jumps and lower body explosive power would be similar to some of the NBA, individuals. They're obviously tuned to have an incredible reach height, and they're big, huge individuals, where the track cyclists tend to be a little bit small and compact, and they're really good at generating power, like on the bicycle. But if you put them in like a hip sled, or if you did just vertical jump, I think you would see, kind of, we were talking about before, force per kilogram muscle
Muscle.
mass. I bet you'd start to see some equivalent measures. Sprint track cyclists, if they are a starter, they are phenomenally strong at low contraction velocities. And
That's
they'll do
true.
those standing start high
That's
inertia
true.
hits. Whereas in
Mm,
basketball, everything is it's
it's
unloaded,
dynamic.
and it's very,
Hmm.
very quick. And one of the arguments for the type of conditioning you need in basketball is it's not how high you can jump, it's how often can you jump at 95% of your max jump.
It's
So
true.
it's about it's kind of density of intensity within the game becomes the feature that has a performance outcome, versus one-off measures are more kind of like
That's
a
true.
God-given talent. Like some people are just
Yeah.
incredible jumpers. And look, the big jumpers are so much fun to watch for the NBA, like All-Star Week for the dunk competition. They're just
Ah,
amazing how much air they can get. But as far as, look, it's a good question, and I don't have the specific numbers, and it would actually be a fun comparison to look across a couple of different explosive sports and compare, like NBA lower body strength and power and muscle endurance measures across different sports. And I don't know, but I suspect that you're starting to see the highest levels of muscle quality in both the top NBA players and the track sprint cyclists. Probably, especially at the higher velocities, you'd see that, like the power measures.
yep, yep. All right. So you've left the 76ers, yeah, the
Yes.
Sixers, and
Yeah,
now your venture for the last 4 years or so is Aperon Life. Is that how you say it?
that's right. Appear
Yeah.
on
Why
life.
don't, why don't you tell
Yes.
tell us about that?
Okay, so this was a tricky decision. I meet this guy, Jeff Yang. You can look him up. So he is a Stanford MBA. He is a very clever individual, and he started a venture capital company right on Sand Hill Road, the real classic place to the VCs hang out in Silicon Valley, and it's called Red Point Venture. And he is very sporty. So he knows, Tiger Woods, he knows all the people in the
Mm.
PGA, he loves his golf. He has been involved with the US ski teams, ski and snowboard team, and he sat on their board. He's worked with the USOPC and helped raise a tech and innovation fund. So very clever with how to invest money, very interested in technology, loves sport, part owner of Golden State Warriors. So he's into sport. We have a lot of shared colleagues, and I started to meet him just for general conversations. Colleagues of mine said, you should really meet this guy. He's very clever, he's very interesting, and he wants to do some stuff that you might find interesting. So what he was doing is, he said, as a venture capitalist, they kind of look at how markets build up, and he was really watching the interest in health and wellness and fitness through decades of life and health span. These themes, he was just watching them grow. And he's like, this is Google's into it, Apple's into it, Intel's into it, Amazon's into it. I'm into it. And he's also, doing this in his kind of late 50s. And he's saying, look, I've got a great life, very athletic, loves to ski, loves to golf, loves to hike. His family's very, very active. And he's like, him and his friends want to try to get, signal through noise. Like, there's things that are being said, but they kind of want to understand. If you want to understand an industry, you start your own company, you try to grow a company in that industry, and that helps you gain
Okay.
appreciation for how to invest and understand that industry.
Okay.
So he came to me and said, I want to build just like what you're doing with the Sixers, just like what you did back at the Institute of Sport. I want your help to help build up a team and build up a facility. And I will bring you high net worth individuals who are very interested in their health and their wellness, and they want a team around them to help them make good decisions. They don't want to die of dumb stuff. and they want to be able to, they're time poor, but they're financially very capable. And so we were able to hire like 16 people. We have a little facility. And then the idea is to explore, if you had all the money in the world and you had a whole team around you, what would they tell you about, your life and how to live it? And the idea is not necessarily to maximize any one thing, but to try to optimize within the constraints that you have. So if you were a woman and you lived in Okinawa and you had your garden, great. Stress is low, family's high, you're eating, a lot of plant-based, food sources, and life is good, and you're going to live to 102, and you are going to be fairly capable cognitively and physically along that path. And it's a very healthy, long, happy life. But you're not. You're a professor, or you're a startup, or you're Elon Musk, or you're Tim Cook, or you're running huge companies, or you're an emergency physician, or you're a pilot, or you're a healthcare worker in an emergency room. So you don't have your little garden. You're not in Okinawa. It's a whole different world. So one of the questions was, how do you reverse engineer a person's opportunities to try to give them the biggest bang for the buck with the time that they can invest? So we spend a lot of time at the beginning about saying, what are some of your goals? And then we introduce them to what we call healthspan domains, which is all of the physiological systems that are known to decrease function with age. And these are just physiological systems. VO2 max, teach it in school all the time. Hit 40, 10% per decade. Boom, 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 boom. This is what happens to aerobic capacity. Get 115 mils per kg, life is not good. So there's these zones of frailty with almost all of these different health span domains. So we look at bone density, and we look at body composition, and we look at cognitive health, and we look at muscle fitness and balance and movement quality, and aerobic fitness. And then we build up a profile, and then we start to say, let's think about some of the goals you have. Sometimes it's golf, some activities, sometimes they want to look good. They're going to a wedding and they just want to they want to lose some weight and look good. And what we will do is we'll say, here's your health span. We're quantifying all this, we're measuring it. This is where you're really weak. This is where you're a little bit low, and this is where you're really good. So like a decathlete, like an athlete, we would say, let's maintain your strengths and let's fill in activities within your week to help resurrect some of your weaknesses. And just like athletes, these elite executives and high performers in the Silicon Valley, Bay Area, they tend to do most what they love and probably need least. And they tend to not do the stuff they really need, but they don't necessarily like it. So they just avoid it. So you can imagine 65-year-old woman, looks super fit, very attractive, really running businesses, 3 companies she's exited. The woman's on fire, and she comes in, she gets tested. She does Peloton 3 times a week. She does yoga 3 times a week. She even does a little swimming. And we have almost, 3 standard deviations lower than hopeful for T-scores for bone density, and almost no muscle mass, no strength. And even the balance is not that great. And she's like, what? Look, swimming, yoga, Peloton, this is not the kind of stuff that's going to give you bone mineral density. And they can't, if you're in our area, that is so intuitive, it just hits you in the face. But if you're, a blockchain cryptocurrency guru and you've never set foot in a biology class in your life, this just blows you away. You just can't believe that you could exercise that much and not
because you're not carrying your body mass, but they don't,
because you're closing your rings, so I close my rings every day, but you're like, yeah, but closing your rings is almost a false sense of security.
Closing your rings, what is that? Sorry,
close your rings is on the Apple Watch. If you walk, it starts to, with the accelerometer, identify like 10,000 steps, and you can
10,000 steps and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So anyway, so that's the idea. And then what we do is we monitor the individuals with wearables. So they might have Aura rings or Apple Watches or Garmin's or whatever. And we've tried to set up some software, and we can either use direct API to software, or we try to make it so you can manually input it. And then we have something that we call healthy signals. So the signals are how different modalities with intensity and duration culminate to feed one of these health span domains. And then we just play a game of optimization. So if you did yoga, it doesn't give you much for aerobic. It's not an aerobic fitness signal, and it doesn't give you a lot of muscle fitness signal, and it doesn't do very much for your bone. But if you're skipping rope and doing cross training, that's great for your bone. That's good for your muscle. It might not do a lot for your VO2 max, and it might not do much for your movement quality. So then it's a Rubik's Cube. It's an optimization problem that has ongoing support. We meet with these people every week, and they
Okay.
come in for like quarterly check-ins, and then we kind of play this optimization game. Now they will come in and they want, what do you think about, infrared beds and
Creatine.
what should I do? How about Normatec? Or I want to
Ice
buy
baths.
salt room, or I want to buy ice baths, or they've listened to some podcasts which weren't even available 5 years ago. And
Mm.
what we'll have to do is very much like elite athletes, we'll have to say, let's really focus on the main movers. Let's get this lifestyle kicking. And there might be a chance to put in some infrared, and but what we don't want is, we talked about Shona Halson before. There were AIS athletes that like to hang out in the recovery center all the time. And you're like, you're not lifting and training. You're
Just
just
recovering.
spine. You're at a spa. You're not at the AIS. So we try to tell people, I don't care if you do, you talked about magnesium. I don't care if you want to try magnesium. That's fine if you want to try it. But what would be really good is if you didn't drink a bottle of wine every night and
Every
go to
night.
bed at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Yeah. Then we'll talk about magnesium.
Right.
So
So,
that's
so
it. That's what we're
wow.
doing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the high net worth individuals.
Yeah, yeah. So right now it's pretty expensive. It costs $30,000 to $50,000 a year to work with us,
Ooh.
which might seem like a lot of money. But we're in a market where people are paying, over $100,000 a year to work with concierge medical docs to look after them. And we
Wow.
say, instead of like a medical approach, we're more of a lifestyle medicine approach. So we are really trying to work with you to make sure that your lifestyle is fun and engaging. It's very, very time efficient, super low risk of injury. We don't want to hurt anybody, and that we gotta be super time efficient. So when you come in, we got to make sure you get everything you need. And they travel around a lot and have to reschedule a lot. So we have to be very flexible. Four of our staff are just logistics specialists, so like personal assistants that just work with the other person's personal assistant to help set things up. And then we're introducing them to new products like, tonal, or we're introducing them to, different techniques. Some of them will use blood flow occlusion as an approach with certain types of injuries. We do have doctors and PTs, physical therapists on standby for referrals. We try to build up a real referral network. And what I've found probably is the most interesting is, as you get older, ageism is a real thing. So as you get older, you watch what happens, 60, 70, 80. If you go in and go, my back hurts, the doctors will often say, well, Bob, you're 75 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going to
Mm.
work like it used to. Whereas we don't
Mm.
do that. We go, if your back hurts and you're 75, let's fix it. Let's get on top of this
Mm.
right now. Let's go. And then the other thing that happens is people get hurt as they get older. And physical therapy is about getting you back to, you can get out of bed, you can dress yourself, you can walk to the car, and you can go to work. And what we're saying is,
Go
if
beyond
you
that.
like pickleball and you like skiing, we
Yeah,
got to get
exactly.
full rehab. We got to get you all the way back. We're not going to just stop at you can walk.
And I noticed you mentioned lifespan, a little bit longevity at the start, but you seem to be focusing more on health span because
We
it
are.
seems like every podcaster or whatever is, well, I won't say who they are, but
They're everywhere.
there's
Yeah.
Harvard professors and things saying if you take
Yes.
this and this, you'll live to 100, and you don't have to age and all this stuff.
So you bring up, so there's a good point. We're not making any claims with lifespan. Like you said, we're
Hmm.
saying, I don't know how long you're going to live, but we want to make sure your body is fully functional and pain-free. We want to make sure that you got a little aerobic capacity, you got a little strength reserve, you got a bit of mobility, you can put on your shoes, you scratch your back, we want to make sure you have balance, you're in a boat, you're fishing with your buddies, you can accommodate. We
Hmm.
want to make sure that you are as generally functional as possible, across all these different health span domains for as long as possible. And we know you're fighting, the tide's coming in. We know you're fighting against an inevitable, but we want to delay it for as much as possible without having to give up on life. Like, you don't want to just be one of those guys or girls that can't, no, you have no friends, you have nobody. All you do is you're eating your alfalfa sprouts and you're just taking care of your health. That's all you do. Then what is it? What is life for? What does it mean to you? So we're trying to say, live your life, be part of the communities and the activities that are meaningful for you. But even if you're like, one of these Tibetan monks and you understand happiness and you're like the Dalai Lama, you still want your body to function, don't you? You don't want to be sitting in a world of pain as you try to enlighten the world. You have to keep your body working. So we try to stay focused on those themes.
And you mentioned an example of the person who's doing the yoga and the Peloton and all this and is fit, but she's not strong and maybe her balance isn't that good or whatever. But I imagine quite a lot of I guess I'm not sure what your clientele would be, because if they're not really worried about their health and their exercise, they maybe wouldn't come to you.
Yeah, some of them are also investors and they just love the space and they're like, I want to learn from you. I just want to come in and learn from you guys. What would you have me do? How do you look at this? We have to listen to the podcast just like they do, so we can talk about it. We have to read the books just like they read the books, so we can talk about it. So they want like a valued friend. They want like a second opinion. What do you think of this? Some of them are can you imagine running a company like Apple or Google or Intel, or can you
No.
imagine running that company?
Yeah.
So a lot of times what the CEOs and the C-suite will do is they will just say, I'm making a lot of money, but I'm no way are they going to think about investing it. So they get a wealth manager and they give their money to the wealth manager. They go, this is my money. These are my goals. I trust you. Real estate, crypto, S&P 500, whatever. You take care of it. New election, markets are changing. You take care of it. My brain is about running my company. So, and I got to do this with everything I have. So then they have social coordinators that take care of, their clothes and the social functions and birthday parties. And they have somebody like personal assistants that take care of all that because they're working on their company. So what they'll do with us is say, I'm going to give you 3 hours a week. Okay. I don't even want to think about it. You think about it, and you got to keep this body together for as long as possible. Because I get confused. One, I don't know the area, and two, I don't have the time. So I will do what you do, what you tell me to do.
And are you
Sometimes we
actually,
have that.
so are you actually training? So that 3 hours a week, is that just for information and things, or does that include their actual exercise?
No, they're meeting with, we'll place chefs in their home. They'll have personal trainers that will catch up with them. They'll have Pilates instructors, yoga instructors. They'll have psychologists that work with them. Depending on what their needs are, we have, 4 registered dietitians. Food's a really big deal. Food and supplements is a really hot topic. And so they will have a team around them, and then they sit in the middle. One person, usually it's the registered dietitian, she'll be the client advocate, and she kind of puts the team. We run it just like a team. They're rounds once a week, and we go through a list of the clients, and there's doctors and PTs and the whole team. We sit around and their chart comes up and everybody's like going, okay, they got this wrong and this is going on, and they're getting ready for Pebble AT&T, and right now their Achilles is hurting. They were playing pickleball, and we can talk to the physician. Let's see what we can do. So it's that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So the 3 hours a week is stuff directly interacting with you guys, and they might be off doing their own exercise separately, or is the 3 hours a week the total that they'll be devoting to it?
It's a mix. Some people will do, so if they give us 3 hours, they might say, I'm good to do 2 of the unsupervised, or they might say, I'll do an hour of it unsupervised, but I want to do 2 hours with you guys. So those they can just drive over to our facility and people will meet them and they'll take care of them in the facility. A lot of home visits where people will be met. Some of these home gyms in their houses are just phenomenal. So our group will go over and train them in their facility.
And how much, okay, you mentioned supplements. Now I do want to, I want to talk about supplements a little bit. So again, it's the belief thing. So, I think you and I both whether it's, this company or just generally, feel that most of what you're bang for your buck is going to be exercise,
Yes.
healthy eating, maybe
Sleeping
sleep,
food. Yep.
food, all that stuff. And these supplements are probably just, not a massive thing. Is that what you're thinking as well?
Yeah.
Are these
Yeah.
people wanting, because they'll turn up, they
It,
want all these things, they want
they
the
do.
gadgets.
It's human
And how
behavior,
much of
isn't
it
it?
again is belief, right? So if they believe that they
Yeah.
should do this and that.
Yeah,
Mm,
some of it could. There's a couple studies now with sleep, and it's not necessarily a supplement. I talked to Shona about some of these, Shona Halston about some of these studies where you wear like a sleep device, say it's an Aura ring, or
mhm,
they do full polysomnography and measure your brain EEG while you sleep. And what they've done in these studies is they've split the group based on good sleepers, moderate sleepers, poor sleepers, but there are two groups of equivalent sleeping quality. And then the intervention is one group starts getting told, you're an amazing
uh,
sleeper. It's incredible. You
mhm.
might get tired in the afternoon, think, oh, I need a nap, but you really don't. You'll power through it and you'll be amazed. You'll remember where your keys are. You remember names of people that you hardly even know. You'll feel like there's like a little bit of math and you're just like, oh my God, I just added that up without even thinking. Like your brain is sharp, like you're amazing.
Yeah.
And then the other group, they tell them, you probably forget things. You probably feel like you got to take a nap. You probably need one. You might find you forget your keys. And it's almost like a horoscope. They do all this suggestive planting, and then you look for what you believe is going to happen. And within 3 days, cognitive tests can decline in individuals who are essentially lied to and told that your sleep is going to get bad.
Mm,
And so you can imagine if you've got good salesmen, like this is going to help your joint health, or this is going to help your
mm.
energy levels, or this is going to help you sleep better.
Sleep better.
There's so much
Maybe you
just
do.
general
Mm,
anxiety that people have that sometimes taking a pill helps calm them, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. With that said, it can get overdone where people start getting frustrated. They're like, I'm taking all this crap and there's got
mhm,
tons of pills and pill boxes. I'm taking this and that and this and
mhm.
that. And then they have a series of bad days and they'll have a moment where they're like, this is all just stupid. This is the stupidest stuff ever. Like none of this stuff is
Get
working,
rid of all of it.
I'm super
Mm,
tired and now I'm sick and I took all this vitamin C. My urine is orange and it doesn't, and so they'll
yeah.
give up on it as well.
Mhm,
So I think that with supplements, we try to do a hierarchy of needs and say, do you like taking supplements? Do you believe that they can help you? Oh, I've had good experience in the past. Okay, well, let's go for some things that, a little D for somebody low in D never hurt. A little iron for somebody who's low on iron, that never hurt. So there might be some ways to supplement that are more evidence-based. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is some people supplements are kind of a segue to behavior, where you say, the creatine is a really interesting supplement, isn't it? Like it's amazing,
mm,
especially when you're lifting. So we can get you high quality, pharma grade creatine, pure stuff, the kind of stuff that even Keith Barr would love this. This is good stuff, right?
mhm.
But it's a little expensive and it works best. This is going to support you when you're lifting. So then they take their creatine, their 5 grams, and they're like, crap, I'm taking my creatine. I bet I should get my lift in. So
Oh,
if
yeah.
it cues behavior, sometimes
Yeah.
a supplement can cue behavior. Then you're like, do you really need creatine? For his level of lifting and who he is, maybe not so much. But if it cues behavior and it works together, let's go for it. Let's try it out. Um, the
All right.
supplements for lifespan,
Mm,
that we watch this market just explode. It's going to go crazy. And how do we know? Like, I get flatworms and mice, but
mm.
how do we know that these supplements are going to help you live a longer life? And do you really want to live a longer life if your body's falling apart underneath you? So it's an interesting time to be alive.
Oh, it's great to chat. So just before we finish up, I just want to ask, what's it like? Sometimes do
Mhm.
you miss okay, I know that the work you're doing now is with high achievers and things, but do you miss the adrenaline of the
Yeah.
competitive athlete?
Yeah, I do.
Uh,
I do. And that's where I
yeah.
think ACU helps me, Sixers help me, and even QAS help me. I think it kind of helps me kind of scratch that itch. I think I've always really enjoyed being around really capable individuals who don't mind risking it for, to see, like, really push their bodies to see what they can do. And world championships and Olympics and like big events when the people that you're working with are doing well. It's a real rush. I love it. I think it's really fun.
Well, this has been great, and I've enjoyed the belief stuff. We got into that a lot, and I'm just realizing I'm believing more because you've got the haircut, you've got the look, you've got the books. You're
Look
gonna
at
have
you
the
gotta
books
look
behind you and the
at it.
degrees,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
books, and I've just got this nice, picture. So I've got to lift my game. I think it's
I
a nice
know.
view. It's where we used to live in Melbourne, actually.
That's so
So
good. Yeah.
it's South Bank where you look out and you've got Flinders Street Station and Federation Square and all that. That's where we used to
So
live, but
pretty.
we don't even
Yep.
live there anymore. So I got to change that.
Okay.
Okay, well, great to chat to you, mate.
I loved it. Thanks for
I
giving
loved
me
it
a
too.
chance to chat. That was a lot of fun. Thank
And
you.
now it's just Sunday night, so you go to bed or something, hopefully.
I'll go have
Yeah.
some magnesium. No.
Oh, there you go. That'll help you. Yeah, exactly. Well, if you believe it.
Okay.
Okay, good on you, mate. See
All
you.
right. See ya.
Bye-bye. See you. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please like, subscribe, pass it on to your friends and colleagues. Check out the other podcasts. Thanks again.